So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and emerging. So welcome today, and thanks for joining us. We're talking about closing the feedback loop in RTOs. So, if you worked in vet for longer than 5 minutes, we always collect feedback. We do forms and surveys and end-of-course questionnaires, and even get those occasional cryptic messages left on a workshop table. But here's a shift under the standards for RTOs 2025, and this is that collecting feedback is no longer the main event. Using it is. So today we're going to dive into what that actually means, because as we all know, the game has changed. Feedback is now evidence, not admin. Engagement needs to happen before, during, and after training. And most importantly, RTOs must show what they did with that feedback, just not where they stored it. So we're going to explore how to turn feedback into improvement and how to close that loop with our learners, employers, and how to build a system that shows ASQO that, yes, we really do listen, and here's the proof. So hopefully we'll look at some practical strategies, some simple tools, and maybe a few clever shortcuts to make feedback meaningful, manageable, and actually helpful. And not just for compliance, but for the learner's experience as well. For a long time in vet, feedback was basically a paperwork ritual. We hand out the survey, we hope somebody fills it in, we file it away, job done. But the standards for RTOs 2025 have officially retired that approach. They've looked at our old feedback habits and said, that's it, thanks, but no. Now feedback isn't a form, it's a conversation. It's ongoing, meaningful, and we actually have to use it. It's how we check if the training works, if learners are coping, if industry is happy, and whether we've actually fallen behind the times. In short, feedback is no longer a box tick. It's a tool for improvement. So feedback matters because it helps the RTO answer 3 essential questions. Are we delivering training that is relevant, current, and valued by industry? Are learners being supported to succeed? And are our systems working as we intended? You probably noticed industry changes faster than a learner dodging an overview assessment. New tech, new processes, new expectations. Employers want graduates who can hit the ground running, no tiptoe in wondering whether or not the on button is. And that's why industry feedback is so important. It tells us what's current, what's changed, and what we need to stop teaching because it quietly disappeared from the workplace, 3 years ago. Sometimes industry tells us that they've gone digital. So they want us to teach our learners digital tools. Or they say our WHS processes have changed. Or the classic, please help them communicate before they meet our clients. Under the standards for RTOs 2025, this isn't optional. Industry feedback keeps our training sharp, our assessments realistic, and our graduates job ready. So we know learners experience training very differently to what we see in the front of the room or behind that computer screen. We see participation and submission patterns, but learners see barriers that we can't. The stress, the confusion, the technology headaches. Learner feedback is how we discover what's really going on under the surface. They might tell us the workload is killing me. Well, they always tell us the workload is killing them. The assessment instructions make no sense. My internet barely works. The pace is too fast. I'm struggling, but I don't know who to ask. These are the things that we wouldn't spot by just looking at attendance or an LMS dashboard. When learners share their experiences, we finally understand what training feels like from their side. And that's what helps us refine support, improve our delivery, and keep our learners moving forward. And here's the truth. The standards for RTOs don't care how pretty our policies look on paper. They care whether those systems actually work in real life. So if we've got a TAS that no one follows, a support procedure no one uses, this isn't a system. It's just stationary. So the big self-assurance questions become, are our systems working as we intended? Or do they just exist? Policies that promise 48-hour replies, but learners are still waiting next Tuesday. Support processes no one remembers to mention, and delivery methods that were great in 2019, but are screaming for an update. All of these things are what we're trying to spot by using our feedback. And are there any of those sneaky barriers that we actually create without realizing it? So asking these questions helps us check whether intention matches reality and whether our systems are helping learners succeed, or are they quietly getting in the way? So the standards basically move the sector into self-assurance modes, which basically means we're not waiting for ASQO to tell us how we're doing. We're expected to know that. And that's the centre of it. Feedback, lots of it, before training, during training, after training. Basically, anytime a learner looks in our direction. For RTOs, this means we're not just collecting comments for curiosity. We're collecting feedback at multiple points in the learning journey. We're analysing it for patterns, not just that one loud moment, and checking those findings with trainers, employers, and learners, and using all of that to guide planning, improvements, and resources. So in other words, feedback becomes proof that our decisions are evidence-based, and proof that we're improving continuously. And proof that quality isn't something we talk about once a year. It's something we live every day. One of the biggest goals of the new standards is strengthening that relationship between the RTO and their stakeholders. And feedback is basically the glue that holds that all together. So first we've got our learners. When they give feedback and actually see something change, like clearer instructions, updated resources, the trust goes up. They feel heard, they feel respected, and far more likely to stay engaged. Then we've got our employers. Nothing wins them over faster than training that actually reflects the real world. When they share advice and we act on it, they stop seeing the RTO as the training provider and start seeing them as a genuine partner in workplace development. And of course, we have our trainers and assessors. Feedback helps trainers and assessors understand how their delivery lands with the learners. What's working, what's confusing, what needs a tweak. It opens the doors for professional development and gives our trainers the support they need to keep improving. So really effective feedback systems don't just close loops, they build relationships. So the standards are basically telling RTOs, enough with the collect and file routine. We're moving away from the old transactional mindset to the one, that one where we handed out the surveys, file them away and hope no one asks what we did with them. Instead, the standards pushes towards a far more collaborative and transparent approach. One where feedback isn't a form, it's a conversation, where learners, employers, and trainers can actually see how their input shapes what we do. And where the RTO becomes a partner in quality, not just a paperwork factory. So we're moving the mindset to something that's far more collaborative and a whole lot more transparent. So it's a shift from those one-off surveys. We're going now to ongoing conversations. Those generic questions, we need to have purposeful, targeted engagement. Collecting data, we're going to actually use that data. And reporting results, well, now we're going to show real improvement. And compliance, for compliance sake, well, that's quality that actually means something. So under this new model, feedback isn't a once-a-year ritual. It's everybody's job every day. And it becomes a shared responsibility across the whole RTO. It's woven into practice rather than stapled to the end of the course. So when RTOs actually use that feedback, everyone wins. For learners, the benefits are big. Instruction suddenly makes sense. Learning feels relevant instead of random. Support shows up when they need it, not after they've panicked. And their pathway into work or further study becomes a whole lot clearer. For our trainers and assessors, it's just as powerful. They get a clearer picture of what learners really need. Assessments start matching reality instead of confusing everyone, and PD becomes targeted, not death by generic workshop. And the delivery planning gets sharper, smoother, and far more strategic. And it's not just learners and trainers who benefit when feedback is actually used. Employers and industry feels the impact too. Graduates who are genuinely workplace ready, not still warming up. Training that actually matches the skills required by the job, not last decade's version. And faster, smoother onboarding because learners arrive knowing what they're doing. And for the RTO, well, the payoff is huge. Stronger self-assurance capability because you actually know what's working. Early warning signs when risks or learner gaps appear. Better compliance outcomes. Plus a boost to your reputation. Stakeholders notice when you listen and improve. So when feedback drives action, the quality lifts everywhere, from the classroom to the workplace to the audit table. So for years, RTOs relied on 3 classic feedback tools. The learner questionnaire, usually completed at the end when everybody was half out the door. The employer questionnaire, filled in long after the learner was gone. And the famous end of course feedback form, usually a satisfaction survey, wearing a fake mustache. The tools weren't useless, but they were very limited. They only gave us a snapshot after the training was over, which is great for record keeping, but not so great for fixing problems while the learner may still be drowning. So the old approach had a few big problems. Everything was retrospective. By the time we got the feedback, the course was finished and the learner had moved on, and it was far too late to adjust anything. We had minimal analysis. Most of the time, the data got collected, filed, and that's it. It lived a quiet life in a folder, never influencing a single decision. And there was no real feedback loop. Learners and employers rarely heard back about what changed. Improvements were either ad hoc or magically appeared right before an audit. So in short, the old system collected information, but it didn't use it. So what did the standards expect from us now? In short, a whole new way of engaging with feedback. First, we need to engage before, during, and after training. Not once, not at the end, not whenever we remember. Feedback now happens across the whole learner journey, structured, intentional, and actually useful. Second, we have to ask the right questions at the right time. Not vague philosophical stuff, but targeted questions that help us understand what's working, what's not, and what needs fixing. Third, it needs to be we need to ditch the one-size-fits-all surveys, because please rate the course out of 10 Doesn't tell us why somebody was lost on page 2 of the workbook. Real insights come from real conversations, short pulse checks, tailored questions, and honest discussion. And finally, we need to use varied methods. Conversations, micro surveys, SMS check-ins, workplace chats, the whole gambit. Whatever helps us get the truth fast, then we need to use those. So, in other words, feedback isn't an event anymore. It's a system. It's continuous, and it's designed to actually improve the learning experience. So, let's have a bit of a look at some examples of what effective cycle looks like. So before training, before anything happens, we need to collect the kind of information that actually helps us set learners up for success. And not what's your favourite colour type questions. That's the stuff that actually matters. So we're talking about those LLND needs, because if language, literacy, numeracy or digital skills aren't there, the rest becomes an uphill battle. We need to understand about their digital access. Do they have a laptop, internet? Or are they learning on a phone held together by a cracked glass and some optimism? We need to understand their expectations. What do they think this course will do for them? What job outcomes are they aiming for? And then look at support needs. Work, family, wellbeing, confidence. All those real life things that either can help or hijack their learning. So gathering this early data helps us plan properly. It helps us think about reasonable adjustment, the right resources and support strategies that actually make sense. And we're all doing this before we enrol our students, but are we actually using it? We also need to make sure that we ask those right questions, the ones that actually help us understand. And so if we were talking about LLND or digital access, the question, do you have a computer, internet and somewhere where you can sit quietly and not have the dog barking at you while they study, are the questions that we need to be asking. We need to ask these questions to tailor the experience so learners aren't surprised halfway through. And we need to check for those support needs. And so we might ask things like, is there anything that might make study tricky for you? Work hours, family commitments, language barriers. Life doesn't pause just because we've enrolled in a course. These early questions matter. They help us remove the barriers, plan reasonable adjustment, and give learners the best chance of success. And yes, they tick a very important box for outcome standard 2.5. But more importantly, they make training fairer, smoother, and less stressful for everyone involved. We have check-ins. Now, check-ins don't need to be long, formal, or feel like a counselling session. Short, simple touch points at the right time can tell us everything we need to know. Are learners engaged? Are they coping? Or are they quietly spiralling while pretending that everything is fine? So week 2 check-ins, we could be asking questions like, how's the pace? Reasonable, Maddie? Is it terrifying? We can ask things like, what's confusing you? Where are you going? By catching confusion early, by catching that confusion early, it's 100 times easier than rescuing somebody in week 10. We might do a week 4 check-in where we dig a little bit deeper and then maybe ask questions about, are there problems with the learning materials or the assessment instruction? Has anything changed in your life that might affect your study? And we could ask questions about assessment readiness. This is where we find out if they're competent or just very good at pretending. So, just ask them, Do you feel ready for the next assessment? What else would help you to prepare? And I think it's really important that we look at our engagement and our communication. So we can check on those points too as well. So maybe asking, are you happy with the support you're getting? Have you been able to participate in everything you needed to? These questions matter because mid-program is the perfect time to fix things, not after the train has left the station. Early questions mean early action, which means better engagement and fewer issues and a smoother plan to completion. And after training, when everything's wrapped up, we don't just wave goodbye and hope for the best. The after training check-ins is where we find out whether what we delivered actually landed in the real world. We ask these questions so that we can find out what has actually happened. Did our graduates sink? Did they swim? Or did they actually swim with style? The final step is how we close the feedback loop. It feeds straight into our continuous improvement and becomes part of the RTO's self-assurance evidence. Proof that we don't just collect feedback, that we actually do something with it. So after training questions, did it actually work? Not just was it fine, but did it hit the mark? Did it feel relevant? We want to look at the assessment quality. Did the assessment feel like real workplace tasks? Were instructions and criteria clear? Or did you need a translator? And we look again at the support and the delivery. Did you get the support you needed? What would have made this learning experience better for you? Support shouldn't be a mystery or an accident. And then, of course, we've got our workplace and employer feedback. So has this training actually improved performance at work? Are there any skills you think that we should add for future learners? Employers always know when we've nailed it or when we're slightly behind the times. And these questions matter so much because post-training feedback gives us a solid variable evidence, and it tells us what to refine, what to enhance, and what to retire, all of which helps us close the feedback loop to keep improving. So asking the right questions isn't about being nosy, it's about being smart. The wrong questions get you polite silence. The right questions get you truth. And when we ask the right questions at the right time, we stop guessing and start understanding and actually fix things before they become disasters. In short, good questions save time, save learners, and save us rewriting assessments at 11 p.m. the night before an audit. Okay, so we're actually moving from passive collection to active improvement. The 2025 standards encourage RTOs to move away from simply gathering data and instead focusing on genuine, purposeful engagement with learners, trainers, and employers. So to make feedback really useful, we need to use it we need to collect it in the right way, not randomly, not once a year, and definitely not after the ship has already sunk. So good feedback is timely. Ask when the learner is actually experiencing the issue, not 3 weeks after they've forgotten or they've traumatically blocked it out. It needs to be targeted, questions that fit where the learner is in their journey. Week 2 questions would be very different from week 10 questions. And no more one-size survey fits all nonsense. It needs to be personalised, focusing on the learner's real world, their goals, their barriers, their context, not hypothetical unicorn scenarios that never happen. And of course, we need to have actionable, the kind of feedback you can actually do something with today, not a vague comment destined for the, maybe one day file. Because when feedback ticks these 4 boxes, it stops being noise and it becomes a roadmap for real improvement. So one-size-fits-all surveys used to be the backbone of vet feedback. And let's be honest, they're about as effective as a generic birthday card. Sure, they're fine, but they don't actually tell you anything meaningful. And why? Because they ask everyone the same questions at the same time, no matter what's actually happening in their learning journey. A learner struggling in week 2 needs different questions than someone breezing through week 10. An apprentice on a work site isn't thinking about the same issues as what a school-based learner studying on a laptop. Employers want insights that don't fit neatly into a 1 to 5 satisfaction scale. So in other words, generic surveys give us generic answers. They miss the nuance, the context, and the real barriers learners are facing. They don't tell us why something isn't working or what to do about it. So let's break down the classic end of survey that just doesn't do the job anymore. So like we said, they only capture feedback at the end. And by the time the learner fills it out, the course is over and the moment has passed. And as we said, it's way too late to fix anything for them. I don't know, it's a bit like asking someone how their meal was after the restaurant's closed. They're too broad to identify real problems. So questions like rate the course overall don't tell us why someone struggled. A low rating could mean unclear instructions, confusing resources, or it might just be a bad copy that morning, and we'll never know which. They miss the nuances between different learner cohorts. And as we said, our school-based learners, our apprentices, our international students, our online learners, they all experience training differently. So one survey can't capture all of that complexity. It's like trying to fit every learner into the same pair of shoes. And they encourage those superficial answers. Anonymous surveys often lead to the tick and the flick. Like good, fine, too long. What was the best thing about the course? The lollies. Not exactly the deep insight that we're looking for. Plus, completion rates are usually, let's say, optimistic. All of this means one thing. One-size-fits-all surveys are great for collecting data, but not the data that actually helps us improve anything. So instead of one boring survey, which somebody asked me further on, do we have to still do the eventness surveys? Yes, we do. They're long and they're boring. But what we should be doing is mixing it up with some targeted conversations, quick chats that get straight to the point. Which part of the assessment is unclear? Is the pace working for you? Those pulse checks, 2 to 3 questions that nudges people's understanding of whether they're feeling confident about the next assessment. Context-specific questions, different learners, different needs. Online, we might be asking about tech barriers. Apprentices, are they getting the right tasks at work? And those micro surveys, those tiny focused check-ins after key moments. Like after assessment 1, about clarity, workload, fairness and support. The secret is that we need to use a mix of conversations, pulse checks and digital tools, because very timely engagement gets you real insight, not that generic fluff. The Outcome Standards 2.5 isn't just about collecting feedback. It's about collecting verifiable information. And I want to stress that, verifiable information before, during, and after training. So that's not guesses or vibes, or not, oh, I think they're fine, but actual evidence. And the best way you can get that, as we said, a mix of verbal, observational, and digital approaches. Talk to learners, watch how they engage, and check the data. So let's talk a little bit more about those conversations. So short human conversations beats the survey anytime, not our bots or all of those AI things. Learners will say things that they would never write, and trainers can fix issues on the spot. So that quick check-in, how's the content going? Anything tricky this week? Assessment chats, is the task clear? Do you feel ready? And support chats. Anything outside of training affecting you? Do you need help with your tech or your scheduling? These sort of conversations reveal the real story. They build trust, and they let our trainers and assessors adjust instantly. That's something that no survey can do. When we talk about short pulse checks, well, these are those quick and candid feedback tool that every RTO should love. 2 to 3 questions, takes under a minute, and you know what? Learners actually respond because it doesn't feel like homework. They're usually digital, so your SMS, your QR codes, your LMS pop-ups, and they're perfect for those regular touch points without annoying anybody. So if we use those pulse checks, we can actually see that learners are actually completing them, that they give real-time actionable insight, and trainers can catch problems early. Short, simple, and surprisingly powerful. So trainers learn a lot by watching, and often more than a learner will ever say. So what are some of the things we notice? Who's engaged and who's drifting? Who follows instructions or is just guessing? And who's lost in the MLS? And of course, those whose cameras mysteriously stopped working. These observations become really important because they give us instant, reliable insight. They reveal barriers that learners won't put in the survey, and they let trainers adjust on the spot. That pace, that support, those examples. We've got so many digital tools that we can use that help us make feedback effortless and accurate. Now, our LMSs can look at logins, completion rates, common errors. We can also use them for auto nudges, when learners go quiet. Our SMS apps, one question, pulse checks, quick reminders and updates, and QR codes. QR codes are great for workshops, so we can get instant feedback from a workshop, or we have on-the-spot check-ins. And of course, we've got all of our video tools like polls, chat responses, digital hand raising, those types of things. These all give us real-time data, less admin, and better insights. And they're especially for our online and our blended cohorts. So when we put all of these methods together, conversations, pulse checks, observation, and digital data, you kind of get a 360-degree feedback system. It captures what learners say, what they do, and what learners see, and then what the tech confirms. In other words, meaningful evidence all the way through the learner journey. Exactly what the new standards are asking for. No guesswork, no gaps, and no one-off, or no one of those hope for the best surveys that are happening. Just going back to a question there, when I say SMS short pulses, yeah, we can do it by our text, a phone text message, or through our LMS system. So let's look at this next part here. The standards expect RTOs to engage with learners and industry in ways that are active, meaningful, and ongoing. What do you think about that? Eh? It basically says that feedback isn't a once-a-year ritual anymore. It's a full lifetime, a full-time life cycle. It's no longer about collecting forms twice a year and hoping they tell the whole story. Feedback is now a continuous cycle of asking, listening, reflecting, and improving. And that goes over and over and over again. So good feedback starts with actually seeking it, not sitting back and hoping the survey saves the day. So what does seek look like? So this is where we do our pre-training LLM or our tech checks. This is our week 2, are you coping? Your week 4, still alive. Post-assessment, did that assessment make sense? For our employers, is it useful at work? Plus those trainer observations, the most brutally honest feedback of all. And why bother? Because it actually catches problems early, makes support personal, and gives real-time insight and shows learners that we're actually listening. Collecting feedback is useless unless we actually listen to it properly, not just a quick skim. So listening means spotting patterns, noticing repeated challenges, and checking issues against trainer input, their observation, and our digital data. It could be linking it back to your TAS or taking the learner cohort into account. So, like an example, if 5 learners say that the instructions are unclear, then the chances are the wording probably is unclear. If the LMS data shows everyone that's stuck on one module, then maybe it's overcomplicated, not a collective of a slow day. And we want to think about this because it turns the feedback into real evidence and stops repeat problems and keeps our assessments fair and consistent. So then once we actually understand what the feedback is telling us, it's now time to act. And the good news, acting doesn't always mean rewriting the entire qualification. Sometimes tiny tweaks make huge difference. So small, high-impact fixes could be rewrite that one unclear assessment instruction, slow the pace slightly so learners stop melting, maybe do a demo video for a tricky task, and give online learners a bit of extra digital support. Maybe bigger upgrades when we need, update learning materials, redesign assessments to actually reflect workplace reality. Maybe we need to offer some targeted PD for trainers and adjust delivery schedules so people can actually attend. And then we could refresh our TAS to meet those learners' needs. It really matters because it improves the RTO's it proves that the RTO is responsive, agile, and generally learner-centred, which is just exactly what the standards expect. And then that final step, and the one that we seem to forget so often, it's closing the loop. It's all about showing people what changed because of their feedback. And this is where we say things like, we updated the assessment because many learners said the instructions were unclear. Based on employer feedback, we added workplace scenarios. You told us the pace was too fast. So we built in a weekly recap session. Or we share those simple, you said we did updates through the LMS, our newsletters, or even in inductions. And of course, trainers also should get briefings so that they know why the changes were made, not just that something magically appeared in the TAS. It matters so much because it builds trust. It encourages honest feedback and shows that we're actually listening. And it gives auditors the continuous improvement evidence that they love. So we talked about fit for purpose tools in the assessment webinar, and the exact same thing applies here. Just like assessment tools need to match the task, feedback tools need to match the moment. So one method won't cut it. The standards expect a mix of tools that actually gather evidence, track actions, and show improvements. Not something we dust off once a year. So this is where we've been talking about these things like the pulse checks. They're really a quick win feedback tool. Tiny 1 to 3 questions that check in, that take less time to answer than it takes to find the mute button on Zoom. So I've got a few examples here on the screen of different types of short digital pulse surveys. They'll tell us pretty much everything we need to know right now. They show us real-time learner sentiments. And they give us immediate reactions straight after a session, an activity, an assessment. It's before learners forget how they feel. And they're so brilliant because learners actually do them. You know yourself, if you're asked to do a survey after this session, and I say to you, rate it out of 1 to 5, you're just going to go 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, because that's what we do. We're busy. But if we have a short, immediate question, then we're more likely for you to give us some feedback. So pulse checks, they're really just those tiny questions with a huge payoff. Now, here's another thing that we can think about, and that's industry consultation logs. So they're really just our way of keeping track of important conversations we have with employers and industry. They're the people who see our learners on the job, so they know exactly what's working and what's not. So what should these logs capture? Well, things like whether the training actually reflects the real workplace, new tech, new expectations, or compliance changes that we need to know about, and how our learners are they ready when they hit the job? So we want to use these because this is the kind of evidence that auditors love. It shows genuine industry engagement, and it also helps keep our assessments current and spot skills early before they become big issues. So this is just where we as the RTO can record a conversation that we've had with an employer, with a workplace, and we keep this as evidence of our industry consultation. We have learner support trackers. They're basically the RTO's we've got your back spreadsheet, isn't it? Eh? Those LMS tools. We record who needs what we did and whether it worked. They're used by the student support team, our LLND specialists, our wellbeing staff, and basically any trainer who's trying to keep learners afloat. So our system should capture those LLND's support issues, the tech and digital access issues, attendance patterns, personal or workplace barriers, of course, any reasonable adjustment we've made, and follow-ups and outcomes. They're so brilliant because they prove we've offered support early, not after things blew up. That they show that we've responded to learners' needs, not just guessed at them, and they highlight those patterns. Like when a whole cohort is struggling with digital skills, and they provide rock-solid audit evidence for equity, access, and in short, support trackers show we're not just saying we support our learners, we're actually doing it. And then we've got our trainer communication benchmarks. So this is our way of setting clear expectations for how we stay connected with learners. And it's not about micromanaging. It's about making sure every learner feels supported and not forgotten. So we might set some simple standards. Reply to learner emails within 48 hours. Give assessment feedback within a week. Do weekly check-ins for online cohorts. Maybe send a friendly welcome message within 24 hours of enrolment. because these benchmarks show us how consistently trainers engage and how quickly learners get help and whether feedback is happening on time. And they're useful because they stop learners drifting away when they feel ignored. They keep quality consistent across all trainers and show that we're operating professionally and transparently. And plus, auditors love them. There's solid evidence that learners received timely communication and support. So, in short, benchmarks make sure we're not just delivering the training, we're staying present, we're responsive, and we're connected. And then this is the one that I've really been trying to get my head around, and that's that you said we did type boards, those simple visual summaries that show learners and industry exactly how their feedback led to real change. So they're a quick read, easy to understand, and perfect for closing the loop. So I've now realised that we can actually pop them into our LMS or email them out, or even use them in a workshop, even bring them to a validation meeting. They make improvements visible. They show what learners and employers told us and what the RTO actually did about it. And it can also show us how training and assessment or support improved as a result. They're so valuable because they close the loop in the clearest way. They encourage learners to keep giving honest feedback, and they demonstrate transparency. And again, yes, they're perfect self-assurance evidence for auditors. Feedback even comes into your validation and moderation calendars. So they're basically our quality roadmap for the year. They lay out exactly when we're reviewing assessments, talking to industries, updating tools, or checking our TASs. So nothing gets forgotten or left to the last minute. They usually include states like validation sessions, moderation activities, even reviewing our TAS. They make it clear that we're reviewing assessment quality in a structured way, that industry voices are part of the process, and that improvements are happening throughout the year, not that panic before audit stuff. They're useful because they prove what the standards expect, validating assessment quality regularly, tracking updates transparently, and continually improving, which ticks all of the boxes for outcome 1, outcome 6, outcome 2.5, and probably a whole lot more. It's a simple tool, but it sends a strong message. Quality isn't accidental, it's planned. And then we can even look at our complaints and our feedback register. This is simply our central one-stop record for everything that learners and employers tell us. Complaints, compliments, suggestions, even those informal bits of feedback that come up in passing. And just as importantly, it tracks what we did about each one. So it should capture the issue or the feedback, who was responsible for resolving it, what action was taken, and when it was closed, and how we communicated the outcome. It's valuable because it shows we're responding visibly and promptly, helps us spot recurring issues before they grow, and gives auditors clean, tidy evidence, and just supports a transparent, self-assured improvement process. We can do post-assessment quick checks. Those tiny prompts that lets learners get right after the assessment they've submitted. You know, it could be via the LMS or QR code, or even a quick paper slip. They take a second to complete, and the insight is gold, because what they capture then is the immediate reaction on clarity, fairness, relevance, difficulty, how realistic the tasks were. They're also perfect for spotting issues early, long before they show up in moderation or complaint. So we use them because feedback is captured while the experience is still fresh. So if somebody's done an assessment and then they're asked for some feedback, they're more than likely to be able to say, oh my God, question 7, it was a nightmare. They help us confirm the assessment is valid and workplace relevant and gives evidence for any redesign decisions. Low effort for learners, high impact for RTOs. So a holistic system shows auditors that feedback isn't collected and forgotten. It's gathered through multiple methods. It's verified with evidence and acted on through real improvements. And then, of course, it's communicated back to the stakeholders. It proves the RTO is capturing, analysing and acting. And that's closing the loop, just as the standards expect. So again, when we talk about the standards, collecting feedback isn't enough. The RTOs must prove that they used it. It's not about gathering the data. It's about demonstrating action, improvement and accountability. So when we talk about showing evidence, what we're really just proving 4 simple things. What we heard from the learners in industry, what we changed because of that feedback, and how those changes actually improved, and then how we told everybody about it. So all of the tools we've just covered help make this really clear. They give us solid, audible proof that we're not just collecting, we're responding to, we're acting on it, and we're closing the loop, exactly as those 2025 standards expect. So part of that then showing that we've done something is with our continuous improvement register. You know, our master log where we track every piece of feedback and what we did about it. What the feedback was, where it came from, the issue or the recommendation, what action is needed, who owned it, and when the due date and the status. So we'll be able to show that the evidence that has been completed. It gives us a clear, traceable story of what we found, what we fixed, and how we proved it. Under the standards 2.5, this register is your core self-assurance evidence. It proves that continuous improvement is actually happening. When we update the TAS, we're basically showing how an RTO has taken that feedback on board and turned it into real documented change. It's one of the strongest signals that we're not just listening, we're acting. So what should we update? Maybe things like our cohort needs, changes to delivery strategies, new support options, revised assessment tools, industry advice, or just those tweaks to sequencing and volume of learning. In other words, everything that helps the training actually work for the people in front of us. So TASs are important because they're our master document. It shows how we've responded to the learner feedback, the industry input, all of those validation findings, and engagement and completion data. So every TAS is evidence that feedback has led to real, strategic, documented improvement. We can also show us closing the loop by our meeting minutes. They're simply a record of all of those important conversations that happen across the RTO. Team meetings, trainer briefings, industry advisory groups, validation sessions, even our quality or management meetings. They capture what was discussed and what decisions were made. And so good minutes should show what the issue was, what decision was made, who was responsible, the due date, and evidence that the action was followed up. These minutes give us a time-stamped proof that feedback was reviewed, issues were discussed properly, and actions were agreed on, and improvements were actually prioritised. And then we might have consultation summaries, quick notes that show who we spoke to, what they told us, what we did, a little bit like our industry consultation logs. They're usually drawn from chats with employers, supervisors, peak bodies, I know, workplace assessors, even our trainers who are actively working in the field. Each summary should capture who was consulted, the advice they gave, and the action we took, and how that advice shaped training or assessment. This matters because now we're showing that we're not making decisions in a vacuum. We're responding to real industry needs and staying current. Consultation summaries are clear evidence that external input is influencing continuous improvement. And then we've got our quick reports to learners. Reports that we send out to let learners, trainers, employers know what's changed, why they did. They're simple, they're short. Because closing the loop is a core compliance requirement, it proves that we don't just collect feedback, we act on it and tell people what's changed. We've got our emails and our LMS announcements. Great. Excuse me. They spell out what feedback was received, what the RTOs changed, what the learners or employers need to know, and when the change kicks in. So these announcements create neat time-stamped records again, which we can save, we can present and audit, and we can use to show that we're committed to communicating clearly and consistently. And then, of course, your RTO might do their annual improvement summary. So before we actually have to do our submission to ASQA in, February, March, we might actually do an annual survey where basically the RTO kind of looks at the year in review for quality. It pulls together big themes, what feedback was received, what changed, and the improvements we made, and the evidence that those changes actually worked. It often sits inside our annual reviews, our QA reports, our self-assessment submissions, or our management papers. So this gives us clear, big picture snapshot of continuous improvement across the whole organisation. And it's crucial evidence for ASQA's self-assurance, our third-party audits, internal quality systems, and board reporting. The annual summary shows ongoing evaluation and improvement at an organisational level, not just in individual classes. So what's ASQA going to look for? ASQA is going to look for how the RTO actually does what they do. So they're not interested in what we intend to do or what we plan to do. They're more interested in what we did. So it's not about intentions, it's about evidence. We need to be able to show, what we did with that evidence. And that's where ASQA will be looking. ASQA makes it pretty clear that what they expect under the 2025 standards, and that feedback shouldn't be accidental or ignored. It should be, as we said, gathered intentionally, analysed meaningfully, acted on promptly, and communicated transparently. ASQA focus under the 2025 standards is simple. Don't just collect the feedback, prove that you've used it. It's no longer enough for those end-of-course surveys, our learner questionnaires, our employer satisfaction. All of those things only show that feedback existed. ASQA wants to see the impact of that feedback. And ASQA won't just check whether you acted on the feedback, they'll check that you closed the loop. And that means showing that you responded, you communicated those changes back to stakeholders and documented the whole process from start to finish. They're looking for those consistent patterns, for those systematic improvements, not one-off fixes or tweaks. ASQA wants to see those patterns, the consistency and the long-term responsiveness. And that, in simple terms, ASQA does not want to see random fixes, rush updates, or changes with no evidence behind them. They're not impressed by last-minute tweaks before an audit, quick patch jobs with no follow-through, all those classic, we fixed it notes, but with nothing to back them up. ASPA wants improvement that's thoughtful, documented and connected, not reactive or accidental. Patterns show that the RTO is paying attention, monitoring their risks, understanding its learners, and responding in a strategic and consistent way. ASPA will look closely at whether your self-assurance processes, review your cycles, your quality checks, your validation activities, and your governance meetings, and make sure that they're actually backed by real, verifiable feedback. It's not enough to say you review quality, you need to show the evidence behind your decisions. ASPA is looking for that strong evidence. So when we use all of these methods, together they show that feedback doesn't just sit in a file, it drives real documented improvement. So when ASPA checks our self-assurance cycle, they're basically looking for signs that quality isn't something we think about once a year. It's something that we do all the time. And ASPA is not focused on how much feedback you collect. ASPA is focused on what you do with it. To meet the 2025 standards, an RTO has to show, not say, that their feedback systems actually work. This is the core of Outcome Standard 2.5 and really the heart of ASPA's entire self-assurance model. So to finish up, let's say that under these standards, feedback isn't a tick box job anymore. And it's definitely not something we collect once at the end of the course. It's now a genuine, ongoing partnership between the RTO, learners, employers, and industry. It acknowledges that training works best when learners feel heard, employers feel involved, and trainers have the evidence they need to improve their practice with confidence. The quality is no longer defined by how much data you collect, it's defined by what you do with it. So as we wrap up this session, I want to acknowledge that this is our final PD for the year. Across the past months, we've covered 6 topics relating to the revised standards for RTOs, and I truly hope that each one has been meaningful, practical, and something you can take back and apply in your own RTO. I've really enjoyed developing and presenting these sessions, and I can honestly say I have learned so much along the way. Now, we will be back next year with more PD sessions, kicking off in February. And what we'd really love is your input. What topics would you like us to cover and in what format? So again, your feedback will shape the 2026 series, just as it should. So thank you all very much. And I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas and a wonderful New Year. And thank you so much.